Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 533. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about rift valleys, Aboriginal culture, and river tracing in gorges literally made out of marble as we go to the wilder side, the eastern side of the island of Taiwan. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen, just back from the Philippines. More about that on the blog, not necessarily on the podcast because we've covered the area I went to before. But for now, let's talk about Taiwan. I'd like to welcome to the show Robert Kelly. Robert is a freelance travel writer, including the author for the last, 10 years, Robert, of the Taiwan Lonely Planet guidebook. Oddly enough, he's come to talk to us about Taiwan, especially Eastern Taiwan. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
First of all, why did you go to Taiwan 10 years ago or so? Was it just because you were asked to go, or did you volunteer for the Taiwan guidebook?
No, I originally went to Taiwan to teach English.
Oh, interesting.
I was back in Canada. Mm-hmm. This was kind of the mid-'90s when Canada was in a huge recession. And I'd graduated from university, and it was 20% unemployment rate for new graduates, kind of like it has been in the U.S. and Europe for the last few years. And I just thought, I can't stay here any longer. And this opportunity came up to teach in Taiwan, and I went. And just really loved the place and ended up staying there. And then eventually I started moving into writing, and I worked for local magazines. And then one day, this opportunity came up to apply for writing for the Taiwan Guide. They were looking for new authors. And I went out to this new area that I knew about, spent a couple of days researching, wrote up 3,000 words, and they liked it. And that's how I got hired.
Excellent. And why should we come to Taiwan?
First of all, I want to say the area we're going to cover today is Eastern Taiwan. So most people, when they think of Taiwan, they think of the West. They think of Taipei.
Sure,
and
right.
Basically from Taipei all the way down on the west side, it's like Hong Kong. I mean, it's dense, it's crowded, it's urban. It's extremely interesting. There's tons of great stuff to see.
Well, you left out very mountainous, which is the thing that really surprised me about Taiwan.
Sure, you've got this mountain range. Actually, you've got five mountain ranges, but the central range goes through the center of the island,
Right.
and it reaches almost 4,000 meters, which is, I guess, over 12,000 feet. It just rises up very, very fast. So you have these western plains, which is where most people live, and then you have this huge mountain range in the center, which essentially act as a barrier for most of Taiwan's history to keep people from really moving to the East Coast. So the East Coast was what they used to call, the Chinese would call the land across the mountains. So it just gives you this sense of a frontier. And up until the end of the 19th century, it was pretty much only Aboriginal in that area. And then when the Japanese came in 1895, they began to open up the area to exploit the minerals and the logging and all sorts of resources that were there. So it's an area that was, for thousands of years, there was very, very little contact. I'll probably tell you a story later. There was some contact with ships coming down, but generally there wasn't much settlement except for the Aboriginals who've been there probably at least 20,000 years, according to the archaeological record. So going to Taiwan, you have to sort of choose, okay, am I going to stay in these urban areas? Am I going to explore temple culture and the night markets and these things? Or am I going to go to essentially this big, beautiful East Coast playground, which has a population density like Costa Rica, as opposed to the West Coast, which is like one long Hong Kong, as I said. So very, very different. So if you want to talk about why do you want to go to Taiwan? Well, I want to tell you why you want to go to the East Coast, because it's an incredibly stunning area. It has some of the highest sea cliffs in the world. It has these marble, literally gorges that are made out of marble. It has blue-green rivers. It has this really interesting old Aboriginal culture with a lot of, in the summertime, lots of festivals, lots of music activities happening. You have a gorgeous coastline. And then just over this short sort of mountain range, you have what they call Rift Valley, which is this beautiful farming area. And the reason they call it the Rift Valley is because it's literally where the Philippine and the Eurasian plates, the tectonic plates, they meet. There's actually places where you can see the plates slipping over each other. It has this really frontier feel to it, which you don't expect from Taiwan. Not many people understand this part of Taiwan, that there is this mountainous and this coastal region, which offers a lot of activities which people don't really associate with Taiwan.
What kind of itinerary would you recommend if we're going to tackle the eastern coast?
10 days to 2 weeks.
Okay.
So if you have a shorter time, I would suggest taking the train from Taipei. It's about 2 hours if you take the tilting train. If you have a little bit longer time, I would really, really highly recommend that you rent a car at the airport. So you arrive in Taoyuan Airport, you get a car, and then you basically start driving. And within half an hour, you'll actually be starting to get into the mountains. You're on Highway 7, then you'll enter what is called the North Cross Island. And for basically about a day, you'll be going on this high mountain road, very windy, in Lalashan, which probably should be one of your first stops, maybe 5 hours from the airport. So you can do it in the first day. There's a cypress forest where the trees get to be like 2,500 years old. And you can drive up there, and then there's places to stay. You park your car, you walk around for a couple hours, and just this immensely beautiful ancient forest. It's pretty amazing.
Now, when you say rent a car and drive, there aren't a lot of places in Asia that a lot of travelers feel comfortable driving. And I did not drive in Taiwan, so what is the driving like?
Well, I wouldn't drive in the city,
Okay.
and I wouldn't drive down south. The traffic conditions are a little bit crazy, but because people just constantly pass you when they're not supposed to, and you learn a lot of reasons why. For example, in North America and Europe, we have the rules we have because if you don't have these rules, people break them, and it's actually very dangerous. I would say going out to the East Coast, it's not that much of a problem. You should have to be careful on the mountain roads because of hazards. There's a lot of landslides. But generally, I wouldn't say it's that much of a problem. If people drive on the left side of the road, yes, the left side of the road. Sorry, I'm in Malaysia now. So I went from Taiwan to Malaysia. Now I have to drive on the right side of the road, like in England. Generally, it's the same as in North America. And then the East Coast of traffic, especially during the week, traffic is quite light. But the other good thing is that the speed limits between the two major cities or towns on the East Coast, it's 70 kilometers an hour. So less than 50, like 45 miles an hour. And generally it's between 40 to 70 for most of the roads. So you're not going at high speeds. They're good roads. The one good thing about Taiwan is The roads are good.
I suspect that's more than the one good thing about Taiwan. Otherwise, you wouldn't have spent so much time there. But
True. Okay.
Let's get back to your itinerary and what you're recommending that we see.
Okay. Well, I said one of the first things you want to see is Lalashan. Beautiful, sort of evocative name, and these great forests that you can see. There's a lot of villages along the way that you can stop in. Fushan is an interesting one. If you're arriving a little late, I would suggest you stay there because there's this old. What's now they call like a youth activity center. These are essentially like hostels, but usually they have dorm rooms for students, and then they have also private rooms. But a lot of them were built on these old villas that Chiang Kai-shek used to have. So this is just like a perfect. It's on a little bluff overlooking a river and the mountains. So that's a good place to stay if you have to stay the first night. Otherwise, I suggest sort of in the Lalashan area up in Baling. There's called like Upper Baling and Middle Baling and Lower Baling. And these are just little villages on this 18-kilometer road up to the old trees. So the one good thing about, not the one good thing, one of the many good things about Taiwan is that in the last 10 years, there's just an explosion of B&Bs. It's just two simple characters like Min Su, which means guest house or B&B.
Okay.
And you'll see these everywhere. You think you're in the middle of nowhere, and then you'll just see one of these signs, and you're like, oh, great. You're never very far from food or usually like really good accommodation. And in a lot of these areas, I mean, you'll just get, like when my wife came on this trip with me once, up in Upper Baling, we had this room with this immense balcony overlooking the mountains. And it was about, I think it's $60 a night midweek. Absolutely glorious place. And these things are really all over the place because the cost of living in the countryside is really low, and people often like own the land and these places, and they build these guest houses, and you just can stay in these areas that you would never expect this level of comfort. So that's a great thing about this trip that I'm recommending. Years ago, it was not like this. If there's anywhere to stay, it'd be like these really dingy hostels, concrete hotels, and the food would be canned food that was driven in from the cities. So that's one of the things about the East is that it was always beautiful, but in the last 10 years, it's also become incredibly well appointed with guest houses and restaurants and cafes. So it's a great combination. So it's a really good time to be visiting. So to continue on in the itinerary, then you would start heading up. You finish essentially the North Cross. It kind of goes up and then it goes down. And you're pretty much at the coast, but you're further north than the coast. You're in what's called Yilan County.
Okay.
And you can drive
because Taipei is way at the northern end of the island.
Taipei is kind of the middle northern end. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So Yilan is essentially east of Taipei, and so you could drive the coastal highway all the way down to what we're calling like the East Coast, to Hualien and Taidong County. But the road has been under construction for many years. So what I would suggest instead is that you go up the number 7 towards what they call Shueban National Park, or Snow Mountain National Park. Again, it's just like another 4 or 5 hours up this windy mountain road. There's mostly the small Aboriginal villages along the way.
And is this the Rift Valley you were talking about?
This is the second day, so we haven't got to the East Coast yet. You're going up essentially the Snow Mountain Range. So you have the Central Range, and then just east of that is the Snow Mountain Range. So you're kind of like winding your way up that. One of the reasons I like to send people up this is because you'll pass probably the biggest cabbage patch in the world.
Okay.
What they do it's actually quite a sight. In the winter months, the rivers of Taiwan dry up. The rivers that are flooded annually by typhoons. So they're big. They're sometimes a kilometer and a half wide, the actual river valley. But in the winter months, it just becomes a trickle, maybe 50 meters wide. So there's all this land. In this area, they plant cabbages. So you have just kilometer after kilometer of this river valley filled with these green cabbages. It's a wonderful photographic opportunity because you really won't see that everywhere. So you continue along that, and then you pass these little hot spring villages that you can stop in hot spring if you want, and then you get to Snow Mountain National Park, which has good accommodation, and you can do some hiking in the area. If you're interested in high mountains, this is a great place. These mountains get up to 3,800 meters. They have great cabin system. This is a beautiful place to stay, and you start to get a feel for the mountains, for pine, cypress. You can stay there, and you can continue to drive up. you're going to reach the highest road pass in Northeast Asia, 3,275 meters. The vegetation now is all this kind of like scrubby, kind of what they call like dwarf bamboo. So there's no trees. You're just now like in this sort of almost an alpine region. This is one of the beauties of Taiwan, is this diversity of terrain in a very small area. We'd have to travel in North America up to the Yukon or the Alaska to see this kind of change, right? Whereas in Taiwan, you basically just drive one day and you're going from tropical to alpine. It's quite beautiful. One of the things I would always suggest is that this stuff doesn't look very comfortable. It's, like I said, it's kind of a dwarf bamboo. It kind of looks very scrubby, but it is really beautiful to lie on. And so if you've got a night, get off the road, just wander up a few meters and just lie on this cane. It's actually like soft grass when you actually lie on it. Continuing there, so like I said, you've been about 2 days now, and now you're going to start going down. You're going down into the East Coast. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going down through what's called Taroko Gorge. It's basically, everybody will consider this Taiwan's top natural site. The very end of the gorge, this is 18 kilometers of marble. Literally, it's a marble and schist and gneiss formation, and it's narrow. I mean, there are places where it's hundreds of meters deep, but if somebody was on the other side, you could basically play catch with them. You could throw a ball. It's that sort of steep, and there's just all these like swirling patterns in the marble and the schists, and you'll drive down through this, and there's all these beautiful hiking trails to go on. You've probably seen, like in China, some of those trails that are just kind of hacked into the side of a cliff. And this is like that. I mean, you've got about a meter of space, and then it's just a sheer cliff on your left, and then it's a sheer 400-meter drop on your right.
And no handrail that I'm seeing on the pictures I'm looking at.
Most of these ones do now. They have kind of like chains on the left.
Okay.
But there are some sections where you got to kind of go around a bend, and there's no. Everybody always gets this picture in this one spot where you come around a bend and you can't see the handrails. All you can see is just this immense gorge in front of you and below you, and it's very dramatic. Probably in the 1930s when the Japanese built these trails. Essentially from the coast all the way up to sort of the center of Taiwan. Well, they have history. Sometimes they have old police outposts that were there to patrol the Aboriginals in the area. In addition to the beauty, like you're actually getting a sense of what Taiwan used to be like. It used to be, like I said, it was kind of a logging and a mineral frontier. If you have the time, spend at least a couple days in Taroko Gorge. There are multiple trails, deep pools in the rivers you can swim in. One of the most famous trails is the Bayang Trail. It goes out to this waterfall. And if you just continue past the waterfall, you enter what they call the Water Curtain Cave, which is literally a cave where water seeps through the rock above you like a shower. And it just pours down on you. Go in there with an umbrella. Most people do. Otherwise, you just come out just completely soaked. So there's a lot of gorgeous trails. You'll see wildlife. You'll see monkeys. You'll see barking deer.
Barking deer is what it sounds like, a deer that makes a barking sound?
Yes. It's a tiny deer, a foot and a half high. And yeah, it barks like a dog. And you will see that. And sometimes even in the higher mountains, you might see like the Sika deer. And that's something that's also very surprising about Taiwan. You wouldn't expect to see a lot of wildlife. But because these areas are self-contained because of the mountains, and now that environmental protection is much better. And one of the things I would really recommend for Taroko Gorge is that you rent a bike. There's a couple places where they will take you up, like in a van, up the gorge, and then drop you off. And sometimes what they will do is they'll drop you off at the trailhead, and then they'll put your bike at the other end so that you can basically walk on this 4 or 5 hour trail. And then at the end of it, you'll have a bike waiting for you, and then you can ride that bike down through the gorge. Really, one of the best ones that I like is the Wenshan Trail. At the beginning of the trail, there's also the Wenshan Hot Springs, which is closed right now. This is one thing about Taiwan is that things open and close. It's like kind of a whack-a-mole kind of like game. This road closes because of a landslide, but then this one opens, and then this one closes. Like I said, it's an incredibly active tectonic area. Geologists literally call it the landslide capital of the world.
A dubious title.
So you do need to be careful. But it's one of the appeals of the area is that sort of naturally rugged area.
Right.
So you have to be kind of careful. But at the same time, it is, like I said, the great thing about now is that it is well appointed with all these sort of facilities.
Sure.
But the natural environment is rough.
When we're doing something like the bike rental that you were talking about, do you have a outfitter you recommend, or?
Yeah, there's a guy at a place called Taroko Lodge. He speaks English. You can write him on his website, email him. I've done it with him a few times. He basically has bikes. He takes you up in his van. You just tell him what kind of itinerary you want. Usually he schedules it because he knows Taroko Gorge is very popular with tour groups. So he knows when the tour groups go up. You're going to be in a place before the tour groups.
Got it.
And then You'll be on the trail while the tour groups are examining things. And by the time you finish that trail, they're all heading back home. So I'd always recommend that, especially that you stay around till about 6 o'clock, because all the buses have left and you're cruising down this beautiful deep marble gorge, and it's really quite a magical thing. So so Taroko Lodge, he's about the best one that I know because he's been doing it for a long time, and he speaks English. There are other outfitters, but the language barrier would be probably too much for most people.
Okay.
So after a couple days in Taroko Gorge, then basically you'd reach Hualien City,
So that's the main city in the east.
that's the main city. It's about 200,000, 250,000 people.
Oh, wait, only that large. Okay.
Yeah. There's, like I said, the population is very low. I think the whole East Coast, the two counties, is 600,000, I think. It's such a contrast to the rest of Taiwan.
Right.
So now we're coming down through the gorge and we enter Hualien City, which is not a bad place to stay. So if you want a base, it's a pretty good place, especially there's a lot of hostels there now. So also because they will be able to set you up for surfing, for river tracing, for bicycle rental, for all those sort of things.
River tracing. I'm gathering that is not an artistic project.
No, it's not. It's one of the funnest things you can do, like in the world. It's something that's big in Japan, and that's why it came to Taiwan. Essentially, it's walking up rivers. At its highest level, it's rock climbing up waterfalls. So there's the East Coast. Basically, it's narrow. The whole area was maybe a few million years ago was kind of lifted up from the sea. So it's all these sort of volcanic arcs that should have been underwater but kind of were pushed up. And that sort of forms like this coastal range. And then you've got this very narrow, flat area between those mountains and the sea. And sometimes like literally only like a few hundred meters. So this coastal highway is literally hugging the coast. And the ocean is like right there to the left of you. And then the mountains are right there to the right. So one of the places that people go is the Golden Canyon. Well, you have to go to this Aboriginal village called Sanjan, which is probably, I guess, about 2 hours from Hualien. Most of your hotels or hostels can arrange this as a tour. And then you put on your wetsuit and they have these little booties that you have to put on, and they have a felt sole. This is something that people like often from kayakers or canoers will come to Taiwan and they'll bring their neoprene shoes,
right.
And they don't work. They don't work on Taiwan's rocks because there's so much algae. They're just so slippery, these rocks. But these felt soles, this is what fishermen used to use these all the time, and then the river tracers adopted them. It's a boot, neoprene boot with a felt sole, and you don't slip. You can be on like an incline, 40-degree incline on a rock that's all slippery, and you won't slip. And so basically you're led up this canyon. You start up where it's really wide, and then you start getting into these like deep mountains, and you're going over waterfalls, and you're jumping into these huge pools of crystal clear water, which is actually oftentimes, it's kind of, the water on the East Coast is oftentimes kind of a bluish green color.
I've seen that on the pictures I've been looking at. It's quite beautiful.
There are places like I've been to where I thought, is this pollution? Because it was so green. But it's not. It's just the minerals from the limestone.
Right, sure.
So the Golden Canyon basically is this day trip, about 8 hours return. I mean, it's rightfully one of the best river tracing venues. It's pretty crowded now, especially on weekends in summer. So there's an outfit.
Are you possibly talking about Matt from Hualien Outdoors?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can Google with the best of them.
Okay. Yeah. Hualien Outdoors, yes. And yeah, he's a good guy to go with, very safety conscious. And you can also just tell him, like, okay, some people in our group who never really done this kind of thing, they're not very adventurous. And he'll take you to a beautiful spot where you just walk along the riverbank, but then you'll get to this gorgeous pool with like a waterfall in the background. He'll customize it to whatever you want, because he knows where all these places are on the East Coast, and there are a lot. And that's one of the things I love about the East Coast, is that it seems like a small area when you look at it on the map, but because of the ruggedness of the terrain and how mountainous it is, there's always like something new. There's always a new valley. There's just so much in a small area to explore.
Well, and what you're describing sounds like something that I have done in a couple different places, just not in Taiwan, not in the 9 hours I've been in Taiwan. But it sounds like going up the Virgin River in Zion National Park, or going up Wadi Mujib in the Jordan. In there, you're literally sometimes pulling yourself up on ropes through the waterfall.
Yes.
This sounds like sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's much more sedate.
Yeah, it depends on. I mean, this up to the Golden Canyon, I mean, it's a variation, of course, because
Right.
the rivers are wider and narrow. You can choose because there's so many rivers in this area, so many valleys that you can choose whatever adventurous level you want. The summertime is a good time to go and do this, not just because it's hot, but also because the rainfall is very low during the summer, so you don't have too much worry about flash flooding,
Right.
which is an issue in a lot of areas. Yeah, so one of the advantages of Taiwan for river tracing is that you have a very mountainous terrain, which means even in Taipei, I mean, like if you go to Ulai, I don't know if you ever went there when you were visiting.
No, I literally was there for 9 hours. I did a layover tour because I was on my way to Thailand, and I had 9 hours in Taiwan. But you're close to Taipei, so you don't have to just wait in an airport for 9 hours. So I went out and did with Viator a 8-hour layover tour where we went to UNESCO World Heritage temples and the night market and the presidential palace, at least on the outside, and went up Taipei 101 and ate dumplings, and then they rushed me back to the airport. So it's a pretty darn good way to spend a layover, but that's how much I've seen of Taiwan.
Right. Yeah, and then that's just all the urban part, yeah.
Exactly.
But literally, I mean, from Taipei, Ulai is this mountainous township about 20 kilometers, so like 40 minutes driving. And then again, you get out of your car and you can just start river tracing. And you can go hours up this river, and there's these massive pools, 20, 30 meters across, 10 feet deep. Because it's coming from the higher mountains, there's nothing between it. It's a strange country that way. I mean, you can be in this crowded urban area, but then because of the way the mountains come down, you can be in pristine wilderness very, very quickly. If we talk about river tracing, that's one of the premier activities on the East Coast. Another one is cycling. Hardcore cyclists have been doing the East Coast for decades. And I think a few years ago, I was in this guest house and I met this whale and dolphin researcher who was telling me that back in the 80s and 90s, she would get friends coming from Germany and Austria just to study cetaceans with her. And they would be like, oh, I want to do a cycling tour. It's so beautiful here. And then they would go out for a couple of days and they'd come back and they would say to her, like, yeah, it's really beautiful, but there's just no food and nowhere to stay. That's just the most miserable part of their trip. You're eating like canned beans. And then that all started to change about 10 years ago. And it's become like the best venue for cycling in Taiwan. So the first day's route would be usually from Hualien, and people would go up Taroko Gorge and then come down. If you're going to do a tour of these, so you're going from Hualien City to Taidong City. Okay. And that's about 183 kilometers. So 140 miles, I guess.
Along the coast or in that
Along
valley?
the coast. Well, basically, I'm going to talk about doing a loop because you go along the coast and then you come up through the Rift Valley. So let's say 140 miles from the two cities. Most people do it 2 or 3 days. Between those two cities, there's some smaller towns, maybe a few thousand people, but largely you're just driving along this coast. And there's no barriers on the left side, so you have an uninterrupted view of the ocean, and then you have a few hundred meters of fields, and then the mountains just start to rise up. So it's really, really beautiful countryside. And the thing about now is that...
So those of us who have fear of heights should drive north to south rather than south to north so that we're on the inside.
Exactly. But I mean, it's pretty flat. There's like one pass, which takes you maybe like 20 minutes to climb up to. I think it's a few hundred meters. But generally, this is a coastal road, so it's flat, which is another reason I think why it's probably so popular.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it's not, depending on the season. So I guess this time of year, the winds are blowing north to south. So you don't want to be going north to south. In the spring, they're blowing the opposite way. You don't want to spend 3 days fighting like a strong headwind. Yeah, it's not
so
pleasant. But then you have all these little small B&Bs along the way. A lot of them will have a cafe. Sometimes there's just a little truck. These are great in Taiwan, these little cafe trucks. You go there and they grind the beans right there and they make it for you. So you don't really need to carry supplies with you. You don't need to carry a tent. I mean, if you want to carry a tent, there's great campgrounds to go to, but you don't need to carry a tent. You carry a little bit of water with you. It's always good to carry some water, maybe a few snacks. But generally, you're just every couple hours, you're going to hit somewhere that's going to have proper food, and generally good food now. These are actually good meals that you're getting. So,
and when you say good food, is the food different over here on the East Coast, which has more of the Aboriginal influence than it would Taipei 101 and dumplings, or what are we talking about?
Well, I mean, you'll have all those things as well. Like you'll have the standard dumplings and noodles. The main Aboriginal groups are the Ami and the Bunong in this area, and the Turoko and there's various other smaller groups. So the Ami have the most influence, and you'll find a lot of their cooking influence, a lot of seafood, and also in the Bunong areas, you'll find more barbecue and wild boar, sticky rice steamed in bamboo tubes, salads made out of betel nut flour, that kind of thing. And then the fruit, you have a lot of like pomelos and what they call like custard apples and pineapples. And these things are all grown in the area. So there's different smaller villages, more on the Rift Coast, or in the Rift Valley, where you can get more purely sort of Aboriginal-run cafes and restaurants. They're serving like a lot of very traditional foods. Okay. So you'll get salads that are made out of literally weeds. I shouldn't say weeds, but I mean like what you may think of as weeds are just growing out in the garden. I had this one hot pot in this one cafe where the hot pot is basically everything's put into a tightly woven basket, and then they pour the water and all the food in there, and then they get these hot stones from the fire and they drop it into the water, and that causes the water to boil, and that's your hot pot. And it was good. It was excellent. So, but also a lot of seafood in these areas. And so the first day, most people will go to this place called Shirtiping, and it's just a little tiny fishing village, basically. Has a couple hotels on the right side, but if you go onto the what would you call it, like a little spit going into the ocean, there's a few beautiful guest houses that you can stay in as well. And so that's usually the first day. Then the next day, you would continue down, heading towards Taidong. There's also what a lot of people do is there's these cross roads that basically connect the Rift Valley
with the coast,
which is the coastal highway. And they're like really, really beautiful because you might get one village on you say 30, 40 kilometer road, and you're going up and then you're going down. So you're getting like these views back towards the coast, and then when you're coming down, you're getting these views of the Rift Valley from up high. So most people do these. One is like County Road 64, and that's one of the most popular ones to do because you're coming down through this valley where it's really popular for river rafting. Pretty much, there's just you in this gorge, like the whole, say, 3 hours that it takes to do the road. And I was going to mention too, in Shirtiping, always try to get some fresh seafood because it's a fishing port, and in season, which is essentially summer, fall, you'll get fresh flying fish.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and and it makes actually great sashimi.
Okay.
Kind of a surprise, but it's kind of one of the staples of the Aboriginals on these islands. You'll get a big plate of sashimi. It'll probably cost you like $5 or $6.
Excellent.
So continuing down, so if you're cycling, you can make it all the way to Taidong the next day. But a lot of people will stay in this town called Dulan. Now, Dulan is something that pretty much, it's been inhabited for thousands of years, the area. But 10 years ago, nobody knew about this place, and you would just pass by. It's just another tiny town off the highway, a couple of buildings on either side of the highway. And then what happened is the employment in the area was a sugar factory, and it closed down.
Sugar cane, I assume?
Yes, sugar cane, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it closed down, and essentially in the area, the local artist suddenly discovered, wow, there's all this like warehouse space. There's like a platform for music, and they turned this sugar factory into an art center for live music and also for wood carving. The Ami and the Bunong are very, very big on wood carving, and you'll often see these little studios just off the side of the road. You can usually just pop in and just watch people at work. It's, like I said, a pretty laid-back place. So I think your other guests talked about this last time you talked about Taiwan. It was extremely friendly. Mm-hmm. People, especially on the East Coast, nobody's really going to, even if you just walk down somebody's driveway, nobody's going to like come out and yell at you. They might just kind of like come out and ask you, hi, what are you doing? Maybe they'll offer you tea, and then after an hour tell you, oh, by the way, this is my land. So you don't have to worry about your safety in terms of like trespassing or things like that. It's very, very laid back.
Although, to be fair, somebody was giving us a hard time on one of the recent episodes that every time we have a guest on, they say, and it's it's surprisingly friendly. And I don't know why we keep being surprised by how friendly people are all over the world. But we did have one episode where a guest said, and they're really rude there. But we won't pick on Malta. But
that's actually something that drives me a little bit crazy in Taiwan, because the Tourism Bureau tries to push that angle a little bit too much. I'll give you one example, though. I think they're a Dutch couple, and they've been driving their Land Rover around the world for the last, 20 years. And they visited 200 countries. And they came to Taiwan, and they said to me, and even before they'd said this to me, they wrote this on their blog, but they said, we may have found the most friendly country on earth. So it's a pretty good endorsement.
That's a pretty good endorsement.
So it's not so much that even that it's friendly, but that it's just safe. It's just safe to approach
Sure.
people. It's safe to wander off somewhere. And that's something that most cyclists that I've talked to who've come to Taiwan, they get that impression right away. They're like, oh, I saw this side road and I was kind of like, oh, should I go down this? And I thought, well, it seems so easy going here. And they do. And then they discover, yeah, there's not really much of a problem there. So Dulan, like I said, literally was off the radar up until about maybe, I guess, 8 years ago, when this sugar factory, they started reviving it as kind of like this little art center. And on weekends, every weekend, on Saturday nights, they have live music at the Sugar Factory Cafe. And it's great. It's mostly Aboriginal musicians from the East Coast, but they do get people coming in from Taipei. They sometimes get people coming in from other countries. And it's just a live jam like every Saturday night. And it's a lot of fun. It's a way to really get to know like some of the local people and also some of the people who've come to this area. It's interesting because there's a lot of people from the big cities in Taiwan who've moved there. A lot of young people who've just decided, I'm dropping out of the rat race and I'm going to open up a cafe or a hostel. So you'll meet a lot of interesting characters and you'll meet a lot of foreign artists and musicians who've settled in the town as well because it's extremely cheap to live in this area, and you've got this great sort of community there. There's this Italian restaurant. I think they're still there. Maybe it was just the bakery that they have now, but this guy just opened up like a great Italian bakery right off the side of the highway. There's enough traffic coming down through these areas that sort of specialized restaurants and guest houses can open up.
So are there any other really main highlights you want to make sure that we talk about before we finish this off?
Dulan would basically be a highlight for sure, but only go there on the weekends because the rest of the time it's more like a local scene. Unless you're a surfer, because that area is one of the prime areas for surfing. They call it Taiwan Open of Surfing. It's like an ASC certified surf competition. It happens every November. So there's a professional surf scene in the area. You pass Dulan, you can go to Taidong, but I suggest that you head back up the Rift Valley because it's a completely different environment. It's wider. Now you're basically between two mountain ranges. So you're on this flat farming valley, and you have the Central Mountains, and you just have all these like tiny little towns that were like old logging towns that you can explore. There's hot spring villages. There's a few good side routes that you can take. One of them I would suggest is the Walami Trail. It's the beginning of a 5-day trail that crosses right over the mountains, but you can just do a few hours of this. And again, like it's a gorgeous, deep, steep canyon. And if you're there in the springtime, go there in the evening when it's just getting dark because it's just lit up with fireflies. At the beginning of the trail, just magical. Yeah, I mean, then you would spend about, I guess, 2 days heading back up through the Rift Valley. Again, it's just like on the coast. You have cafes, you have restaurants, you have B&Bs all along the way. You're never hurting for a place to stay or a place to eat.
Before I get to my last, say, 5 questions, anything else you want to make sure we talk about with the East Coast to Taiwan?
If you have time, especially if you're doing, like, say, a 2-week tour, I would highly recommend that you take a trip over to Lanyu Island. You can either fly there from Taidong or you can take the boat. This is this sort of volcanic island where the Yami Aboriginals live. And one of the fascinating things about the Aboriginal culture on Taiwan in general is that one of the theories is that all of the Austronesians, like in Polynesia and New Zealand, the Philippines, come from Taiwan. Like the culture and the language actually originated in Taiwan and then spread of Oceania and New Zealand and the Philippines. So in the Yami basically are very similar to the Aboriginal people in the Philippines, in the northern Philippines. So it's a very sort of maritime culture. It's just an interesting place to visit. If you want to just get absolutely off the beaten track, you're already off the beaten track, being on the East Coast. And if you want to get off the beaten track, this is the place to go. Mesmerizing landscape, interesting culture. This is where, if you ever seen like those very colorful wooden canoes, you might have seen a picture of one. That's where they come from. This is where the flying fish comes from, and so they have their flying fish festivals. And generally, all summer long, you have a number of Aboriginal festivals along the East Coast. Generally, what's good about them is that they're not really commercial. They're genuine festivals. So they change every year according to the lunar calendar. They're not terribly advertised, even though you know the general time. So you would ask at your guest house or your hostel like where to go. And so this is something about the East Coast that appeals to a lot of people, this distinct culture, but it's not commercial for the most part. People are doing it for themselves, and you're welcome to attend.
Excellent. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Eastern Taiwan. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
That would be a really hard thing, but it might be like in Luye. This is a plateau.
Okay.
And it's where they do parasailing, they do ballooning here. And it's just this long slope, so it has like this perfect natural venue for parasailing. And you're standing there and you're looking across the Rift Valley, and you've got balloons rising up from the valley, and you've got people parasailing, and you've got pineapple fields all around you and tea fields all around you. And yeah, it's just gorgeous.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Eastern Taiwan.
I was in Taidong waiting for this family to cross the road at the crosswalk, and the police on their scooters just came by and they just drove straight through the That's the sort of thing that makes you laugh. And the family took it in stride because they were Taiwanese, and they're actually a little suspicious when people stop to let you cross the crosswalk, because you always know that the person behind the car who stops may not stop. So they were prepared for these, but it was funny just to watch the police actually do it.
Finish this thought. You know for sure you're in Eastern Taiwan when what?
When you're swimming in this green-blue pool of water, the floor of the pool is marble, and basically you're about 20 minutes from a road in a major city.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the region in 3 words?
Dramatic, vibrant, and beautiful.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Robert Kelly. Robert, where can we either read more about your travels or listen to more about your travels?
You can check out my website, which is www.robertscottkelly.com. And also you can listen to what I've been doing on my podcast, which is called Travel Tape. And so it's traveltapethepodcast.com.
Excellent. Those podcasts, I understand, are just a fad, though. So.
Exactly. Never going to work.
Never going to work. Robert, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Taiwan.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
In news of the community, I did just get back, as I mentioned, from the Philippines, where I was hiking the rice terraces of Banaway, which I definitely recommend. We did an episode of The Amateur Traveler on that recently, combined that with a trip to the island of Palawan, which I did not get to on this trip. I was there for a conference, for the TBEX conference. Highly recommend it. Manila impressed me a little less, although I did enjoy the old city of Intramuros, and I'll be writing more about that and putting up some videos on the blog. Also, I did put up on the website the trip to Japan. You can find that under the book Travel tab if you're interested in joining us in Japan in June of 2017. Looking forward to seeing you there. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have a question, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram as Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.